Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today as part of our Microsoft Purview community for state and local government. Today we have a super exciting topic that we're very thrilled to speak with you about. We'll be discussing open AI in our compliance data security solutions, as well as our responsibility models. So we have Leo Ramirez, who's a principal technical specialist with Microsoft, and Richard Becerra, who is a senior technical specialist with Microsoft. But before we get started, as is customary, we'd like to kick off with a little dad joke, per se. So, Richard, I have a question for you. Did you hear about the circus fire?
Ooh, no, I didn't.
Oh, man, it was intense.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
can.
All right. Okay, so thank you again, everyone, so much for being here. Richard, I will go ahead and hand the floor over to you.
Much appreciated, Adam. I like setting the tone with a simple dad joke there. It's good to go. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our webinar today. As you can see on the title screen, we are going to be talking about AI, how it's used in government, how some state and local governments are considering using it, and how some of the tools in Purview utilize it right now. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So we're going to start with just a couple of terms to make sure we all understand what we're talking about here. These terms get tossed around quite a lot in AI conversations, so I want to clear up the confusion right from the get-go. What is a large language model? We've probably all heard this term get used a lot. These are the foundational models that train AI. Think of these as the textbook that the AI student is going to learn from. Azure OpenAI uses large language models. So does ChatGPT. Facebook's AI, Roberta, uses one. They all use the same LLMs. Now, these LLMs collect data from a lot of different locations. The public internet is one of them, but they also collect information from data sets that are collected by data scientists. Microsoft has a number of data sets that we use on top of what's available in the public internet to train Azure OpenAI. So again, think of these very broadly as a textbook. So that leads us into GPT, as we mentioned Chat GPT just before. GPT is one form of AI that's called generative AI. This is what's used to create content, AI that produces text. So when you type something into a chat bot and it gives you an answer, generative AI. AI that creates deepfakes, that creates the opening credits to the Marvel show Secret Invasion, that creates movies and songs. All of that is a form of generative AI. Chat GPT is just one form of it that is specifically focused on chatbots, and it creates realistic dialogue with other people. So that leads us into open AI, and this is something that gets confused very often. Open AI specifically is not a type of artificial intelligence or a program. It refers to the company that created ChatGPT and released it earlier this year. It gets conflated a lot and brought up in the Microsoft conversation because Microsoft invested money in it back in 2019 and again this year. And so OpenAI and Azure OpenAI have been brought under the Microsoft umbrella as terms for our product. And that leads us finally into what is Azure OpenAI then? What's the difference between that and the company? The Azure OpenAI service, this is what's going to provide people through APIs access to all of these multiple LLMs. These are the things you can use to train your own internal AI models if you wanted to, or to just put in some input and get some output from. So think of Azure OpenAI as the library full of textbooks. Large language models are the textbooks individually, and GPT is going to be the student picking one of these textbooks to start learning how to be an AI from. So that quick rundown just to kind of help us understand where we're going. So now we move into how exactly are we using AI? How does Microsoft use this and how long have we been doing it? This comes up as a result of a conversation I had with a customer a few weeks ago. They were concerned Microsoft is just sort of jumping on the bandwagon with AI. It's the rage right now. It's in every headline, and every company is racing to the door to put their own AI model out there. And the concern was Microsoft is rushing right alongside them, and we're not exactly being careful about it, and we're just trying to catch a trend. And that's absolutely not true. I wanted to address that here when I have the audience to do so. We announced our very first ambition for AI all the way back in 2016. That's when we first started standing up laboratories, researching and hiring data scientists. We set our goal all the way back then. That's back before, COVID, pandemic, and remote work. So we've been working on this for a while now. We were actually about 3 years ahead of the government. The government, their first recorded action was Executive Order 13859. That was in February in 2019, and that wasn't a law. It was just the first action addressing it that said, hey, we need to take this seriously and start thinking about ways to handle it. And then when the pandemic hit, when COVID started stressing medical facilities and countries around the world, the same AI that we had been developing since 2016 was turned into a healthcare bot service. And this allowed those same facilities to start screening millions of people to address the huge surge of patients that were flooding medical facilities in every country on the planet. This is what kept it at a relatively tolerable level, or at least a manageable level for a lot of those facilities. Fast forward 2 years, and Senator Schumer goes on record and he's saying AI is an unprecedented major challenge. And he's right. It's likely going to be the defining technology of our generation. And he went on record saying that, hey, we are starting from scratch as policymakers. We are figuring this out as we go. And while policymakers might have been, Microsoft absolutely was not. Uh, we already had version 2 of what we call our responsible AI standard, and I'll show that on the next slide. We spent years refining this. We were working with lawmakers, with other industry leads, data scientists, with educators, researchers. We were working in every field we could to develop this standard. And we published it the same month that the senator was saying, hey, we have to start from zero. And the following month, the White House published the AI Bill of Rights. Now, I don't know for sure that the Bill of Rights was inspired by our pillar, by our standard, but if you look at them side by side, there's a lot of similarity between the two. They cover the same things. The AI Bill of Rights isn't actually a law, though, despite being called that. It's not even an executive order. It's just general guidance. So the whole point of this was to show that no, Microsoft is not chasing a trend. We're not just trying to, rush for the gold, rush for the oil. We have been thinking about this methodically for years now, and we've been carefully building to this point. So what is this responsible AI standard we're looking at? These are the pillars that we use and that we've published to the world to help design AI, not just the stuff Microsoft uses, but if you build your own AI model, these are the things that we've designed. So fairness, make sure that the AI isn't being biased, isn't poisoning things, and isn't reinforcing what we think of as undesirable stereotypes. When you're training the AI model, this is where it becomes important. AI should be able to treat somebody who has very little money in a court setting the same way it does somebody who has the money for an expensive team of lawyers. The AI should be reliable. You shouldn't be able to trick it into producing garbage results. You shouldn't be able to poison AI into breaking its own security or turning up information that it shouldn't. That's something that has to be tested and tested aggressively. Transparency. So you shouldn't need an engineering degree to understand what your AI systems are doing. If I'm the president of a small company, if I'm head of an agency or in just head of a department, I have a lot of things I have to balance on my plate. I shouldn't need to have someone translate what the AI is doing and how it's serving my customers and my employees. It needs to be simple and clear. And privacy, which is a big one and definitely the topic of our webinar today. These systems have to protect data. They can't regurgitate sensitive information. They should not be used, or at least we should make them as difficult to use as possible to turn around and disclose sensitive info or attack other systems. They should be as secure as we can reasonably make them. And then the people who design them, yes, we want them to be accountable. We want to hold their feet to the fire for promises that they make, but it's not just for when things go wrong. Those same people who are building your AI, they should be your focal point for questions, for feedback. They should be the ones who can explain how it's doing so that you don't have to bring in 5 or 6 different experts every time you need to make a change or understand what's happening. Within your AI, whether it's Microsoft developing it or it's something you develop internally in your agency, the people who build it should be the people who can answer the questions about it. And then finally, inclusion. We want AI to be accessible to everybody. If you're visually impaired, we want chatbots to be able to read the screen for you. If you're not getting the right results on a website, maybe it's the city planner website, you should be able to send feedback easily with a simple button that's right there on screen, rather than having to call and go through tech support and wait for people to respond to you. We want AI to be accessible, even if you don't know how to use computers, even if you don't know programming code, it shouldn't matter. This should still be a tool that empowers you. These are the principles that we have published for everyone to use, from government agencies to Google to Microsoft to the hobbyist in their basement. These are what we have said, hey, this is the best recommendations we spent years developing. So scaling that back down, we'll come to Azure AI. And what is the difference between this and Azure OpenAI? So OpenAI is the collection of large language models, the textbooks. Azure AI is the actual AI model that is powering tools such as the trainable classifiers in Microsoft Purview, the themes and the insider risk functionality that Purview uses as well. Azure AI is what powers the governance actions in the Azure Purview portal. So this is the actual looking at things and telling you the results portion of the AI, what you might think of as a GPT or as a generative AI or a machine learning algorithm. And so scaling that down a little further, these are two of the ways that AI and Purview work together. I mentioned our trainable classifiers. This is AI-powered analysis of your data. Now, your data stays in your environment. We don't move it out of Microsoft. We don't even move it out of your tenant. The trainable classifiers that you set up, if you set up your own, the knowledge, the data they're trained on stays right where it's at. And you don't have to do that. You can use a number of the pre-trained AI classifiers that we have already taught how to recognize categories of data. And some of these categories can be things like legal documents, emails that contain harassing language. It can be contracts or resumes. It can even be programming code, and it can be in multiple languages. Microsoft has spent a lot of time and a whole lot of data teaching these things how to recognize that content without needing to use your data to do so. You can apply these if you're licensed for them today in your environment right now. And that's going to be part of the demo that Leo shows you later. That leads us into governance and operations below. This has to do with the Purview data map. So if you are working with your own AI development, if you've purchased Azure OpenAI for government and you have somebody developing assets to build their own model, to build their own large language model or their own AI algorithm, that takes a lot of assets. There's going to be files, data sets, there's going to be the logs for training, the things that the AI does, and all of that can be gathered in the Purview data map and tracked. the same way you would track a SQL column, the same way you would understand how people are classifying your structured data, the schematized data before it gets turned into something like a Power BI report. AI assets have the same lineage that you can follow around. So that's all theory. We're all talking about concept, possibilities. What are some of the ways that people are actually using AI in government today? And I have a couple of examples and use cases we're going to go through. So one example is right here, as it showed, paperless court system. It's not strictly paperless, but it is getting a lot closer to that point. So if you have something like a court proceeding, and there are people in the courtroom who speak multiple languages, traditionally, the transcript had to be compiled and then it had to be translated by a human being bit by bit, page by page. And that's something that can take days, sometimes even weeks for extremely large cases. With AI, now it can identify the transcript as it's compiling it, transcribe it into English, and translate it into other languages at the same time, producing a separate transcription of it in Spanish, in German, in Italian. Previously, when we tried to do this with AI about 10 years ago, the results were less than spectacular. But AI using large language models today has gotten a lot better. It's much more accurate now, accurate enough to be useful in this scenario. But it's not just translating court transcripts. If a judge or a paralegal gets handed a stack of data, and we're talking tens of thousands of documents that could be anywhere from court records to some receipt with some information on it. Previously, a judge would have to sit over that with a pen or a highlighter and just go through it, marking here's what I need, here's what I don't need. Or if they put it into a computer, somebody has to go through there and tag it with some kind of digital identifier and saying this matters to the case, this doesn't. And you're doing this for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of documents. Now, with AI, it can go through that list and say, here's a summary, a one-page summary for the judge or the attorney. Here's what you're looking at, and here are the relevant items in this tens of thousands of documents. Here's the recommendation that the AI can make based on the outcome the human requests. So now you're going from days to minutes of looking at this data and getting useful actions out of it. And of course, we can use this AI to also improve the speed at which courts can respond to requests. Now it's not just criminal history anymore. Now it's, hey, can you mediate a dispute? Or I just need to get information about a law in my area. Now you don't have to call and wait for a paralegal. You don't have to wait for a representative or an attorney or whoever answers the phone to get back to you, or whoever can check their email and get it to you. AI can get that information now and respond to that citizen right away. And it can tell them, here's how I got to this information. If it's a criminal history record or if it's a court case, the AI can provide a summary showing the body of evidence that led to the outcome. Here's how we got to that point. Improving the transparency, getting the responses faster, and making it clearer to citizens, to the requester, how that outcome was attained. Now, that's just the judiciary. You also have finance agencies, such as the IRS, Secret Service, or even just state and local government agencies that manage a budget, that have to deal with tax revenue. And so, how do you tell the difference between somebody who's intentionally been subverting taxes, tax fraud for years, and somebody who just made a mistake and misfiled something the last couple of years in a row? Well, you'd have to normally go through lots of their records, bank transactions, a long list of stuff. AI can go through those millions of transactions and identify the patterns. It can say, here's what we've identified based on the data we have looked at from similar cases beforehand. Here's the anomaly, and it's only an anomaly for this person based on how their spending and their taxes have been filed for the last 10 years or 20 years. This is the anomaly for you to follow up on. Or we can say, hey, This is what they've been doing for the last 10 years. They've been filing for this tax credit. They're not a student anymore and haven't been, but they've been collecting the money for it, and they've been combining that tax credit with setting up offshore bank accounts or putting information into a different name in some other business. All of these many variables that can be identified by AI to say, hey, here's something that you need to pay attention to. This is how you can identify that tax fraud happening. And the reason that matters is because that taxation revenue, that's money that can go back into infrastructure. That's money that a local agency can use to staff up their IT department or buy computers for a school. It's tax revenue that they don't necessarily have to lose, but which without AI would take teams of people far too long to identify. So now AI can accelerate that outcome. These are some of the other use cases for AI. These are some of the other places government agencies are considering using it. I'm not going to spend too long on this slide, but this is just a sample of the places both state agencies and federal ones are considering. How can we maximize our budget for the outcome we want? Can we give information to somebody 24/7 and they don't have to call during office hours? If we can't attract talent, even if we're willing to pay for it, how can we make it possible for our existing IT team to do more without overburdening them? And the section on ADA compliance, if that seems kind of specific, it's because that came up for a customer I worked with. If you're familiar with Section 501 compliance, one of the things it says is screen readers have to be able to identify the content on screen and announce it. And it's for the visually impaired. And previously, we were having a problem with this using some of the watermarking tools they were using. The screen readers couldn't recognize it. And it got me thinking, and I did a little bit of just looking into this, and this is something chatbots, as they get smarter, can handle. They can examine the text on a screen, even the text that's in some watermark behind a PowerPoint slide and doesn't exist as a discrete graphic or might have some other arbitrary limitation to it. Now these chatbots can examine this and they can look at it and read it back to a person. So I wanted to put that in there because that was a specific use case that I worked with a customer on. So far, we're talking about a lot of the concepts here and a lot of the use cases that state and local governments can get out of AI, out of Azure AI, and out of the Purview solutions. And you might be asking, well, we've been talking about a lot of this. What does this have to do with the Purview AI solutions? Well, the big challenge to using any of this data, before you get to all the cool stuff like chatbots and first responders assistants and all of the really neat things that we see in AI all the time, the first hurdle you have to cross is just knowing what your data is. Where is it at? What do we have? How are people using it? That's always been the biggest hurdle for government agencies and for private corporations. And you can get around this somewhat with sensitivity labels, with other means of data classification. But it all takes time and it takes tuning and refinement. And those are things that government agencies just don't always have the expertise or the time for. Moving into the AI powered classifiers, the content explorer that is AI powered, using AI for all of that as much as you can accelerates that process immensely. Now, before I hand this over to my colleague for our demo, I do want to cover Copilot just a little bit. This is on everybody's mind. It's impossible not to think about it, or it's impossible not to have heard about it if you're following the Microsoft AI conversations. So I'm going to touch on it a little bit. We are going to make way more announcements about this at Ignite this year in November. But for now, let's talk a little about Copilot. Copilot is not actually one product. We're going to have distinct Copilots for a number of different services. Windows and Viva, Security Copilot, Microsoft 365, Purview, they're all getting a version of Copilot. Now, Azure OpenAI, as we can see over there, it says you can plug into that with your APIs. We do have a version of government OpenAI available that we can get you connected with. I believe it's in preview right now, but you can, as a government agency, use Azure OpenAI, and you can start setting up GPT-4 or working with your own AI models in there. The other aspects of Copilot, those are coming out towards the end of the year. And there's a resources slide we're going to give you at the end of this presentation, so you can learn more about it and you can see what you need to do if you wanted to register for Ignite and learn more. So some of the common questions that do come up for government customers whenever we're thinking about AI and whenever you start talking about training LLMs with data, these are the things that very understandably every government agency has to think about. So first of all, no, we do not store your data somewhere in Azure. We don't stick it in some key vault. We don't keep it on a Microsoft server. Whether you train your own classifiers, whether you type the information into a Copilot chat prompt, your data is not stored outside your environment. It's part of the architecture of both Copilot and Azure AI. Your data stays where it's at, we don't save it, and we don't use it for something else in the AI. Which can kind of beg the question of, well, then how does that work with trainable classifiers? If you're training them on my content, your content stays in your environment when you set up a custom classifier. The training happens right there. We power the training with our cloud AI, but we don't take your data out of the environment to do it. What this means is the model that you develop in your custom classifier, that's not accessible to some other agency somewhere else. The data that it learned on isn't accessible. They can't pull up trainable classifiers in their tenant. They can't pull up Copilot and ask it, hey, what data does the HR agency over there in the Rapid Transit Authority have, and get any results. The results won't be there because the data didn't leave your environment. Which also means we don't need your data for the foundational LLMs. For the trainable classifiers, yes, but the data doesn't leave your environment. And for the foundational large language models, the textbooks that GPT is going to learn from and then go talk to the world with, no, we do not use your data for that at any time. We don't save it. We don't put it somewhere else to use it. Absolutely not. That is one of the core principles of our responsible AI standards. And even with all that in mind, you still have control over your data, how you want to govern the rules over it, how you want to approve or revoke permission to use it in any number of ways. At all times, you have that control. Tying this back to Purview, how can these trainable classifiers that I've talked about so far, how can Content Explorer be leveraged? These are some of the ways. The AI-powered classification can be used to protect your data with information protection. This is sensitivity labels that can encrypt content or just mark it for protection through other tools like DLP. Those same classifiers can catch that data when it tries to leave your environment. When somebody accidentally emails it to somebody, or they share a link to someone and then they realize 2 or 3 days later they didn't mean to share that link, well, you can use DLP and those classifiers to stop it from getting out the door in the first place. And that leads us into insider risk. You can use these trainable classifiers to identify malicious activity. If people are intentionally trying to circumvent your security and get your data out the door for any number of reasons, to sell it, to disclose it to somebody, to try and take a job offer somewhere else, you can identify that and you can automatically start blocking it based on an examination of their activity, an AI-powered examination. So these are any number of these capabilities. And at this point, I'm sure you're tired of looking at slides and hearing me jaw on. I'm ready to turn this over to my colleague. He's ready with a demo to show you how things are going to work so we can get out of theory and see the practicality. Leo, are you there?
I'm here.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you so much, Richard. That was an excellent presentation, very informative, and great use cases for our government customers. And one thing I want to say to those on the call is if you're on your data security journey and maybe it's moving slow, or maybe it's even on the back burner, this is the perfect time to start prioritizing that journey and that strategy. And what we're going to see in the demo are some things that can prepare you for things like Microsoft 365 Copilot, and also demonstrate the AI-driven tools that are in Microsoft Purview that Richard was talking about. A lot of the concerns customers have, as Richard brought out on one of the other slides, were, well, what can AI access my data, and how is Microsoft 365 Copilot gonna react when a user starts searching for data? Well, the nice thing about Microsoft 365 Copilot is it respects the user's permissions to the content, the files, any information that it has. So anything that it's searching for, it's not going to be able to access if the user doesn't already have permission, bottom line. And for you as an organization, it's just a good practice to have just enough access for all your users. And this is whether you're using Microsoft 365 Copilot or not. Now, let's start talking about a few things that are going to prepare you guys for how you can protect your sensitive information. And I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Okay. All right, here's some things that can get you started if you're using SharePoint online. Now I'm in the SharePoint Admin Center, and this is a list of all the SharePoint sites that are in my organization. So imagine you as an IT admin, a SharePoint admin, you want to ensure that users can't just randomly search across sites. Well, a lot of our customers, they don't know that sensitivity labels can actually be applied to SharePoint sites. And here are some examples of SharePoint sites and Teams channels that I've actually applied a sensitivity label to. And what this means is that only authorized users can access this particular library. It's protected. The whole container is protected, so that just if somebody's randomly doing a search across SharePoint or Teams, they're not going to be able to access this site. So one of the things you can do to start preparing now is implement SharePoint sensitivity labels for your containers. And how you can do this once you've created them, of course, is if you click on Edit in SharePoint, you can go to the settings, and here's where you can apply a sensitivity label to this container. Now, some other things you can do to limit discovery in the searching of files across this container is, instead of this site being on public, you can mark it as private. You can also audit the membership of these different SharePoint sites. So you can ensure that only authorized users are able to access this particular library. So this is a key step that you're going to want to do as you're preparing for not only your data security journey, but if you plan on using things like Microsoft 365 Copilot. All right, now we're going to head over to the Microsoft Purview portal. And we're in the data classification section under overview. And what we're seeing here is a snapshot of the sensitive information that's being detected in my environment. This is a powerful tool that's also AI driven. This is giving me insights onto the trainable classifiers that Richard mentioned. These are AI-driven classifiers that are looking for types of content. So imagine the use cases that Richard mentioned earlier related to judicial systems or tax. You need to find those type of documents, that type of content. Well, you can leverage trainable classifiers to help you do that and really harness the power of identifying that content and then automatically protecting it. And also sensitive information types. Looks like some of the top sensitive information types in my environment are credit card numbers, social security numbers. Most organizations consider this highly sensitive. Well, with this dashboard, I can visualize these are some of the focus areas of where I need to start protecting my information. Now, where this gets really powerful is if I go over to Content Explorer, this is going to show me all these sensitive information types that have been identified, give me a hit count. For example, credit card numbers, there's over 27,000 that are being identified in locations like Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. And with the right permission, I can actually drill into these locations to verify that that those are really credit card numbers. If I go into this finance SharePoint site, it's going to show me a list of all the files that have credit card numbers in them. Yeah, so there's looks like there's several files, and if I click on one, I can even get a preview. This certainly looks, you guys can see this, these are definitely credit card numbers, and I'm gonna maximize this. Now, don't try to take a screenshot of these because these are actually fake credit card numbers, so you can't use them. But the point is that these have been identified automatically. So I can leverage the power of AI that's already built into Microsoft Purview. This is just one example. And as you can see, so many other sensitive information types have been detected. And this is day one, this is happening. And if I want to see what kind of trainable classifiers are automatically being detected, I can filter for those as well. Looks like I have a number of healthcare, finance, IT, and other types of documents that are maybe important to my organization. So if I drill into healthcare, for example, these are the type of files that have been identified. Looks like there's some patient information. This is obviously sensitive. So if you're with a health department, this isn't something you want to take lightly. You're going to want to protect this. But now that you know where it's been located, now that you know where it's been identified rather and discovered, it's in this SharePoint site, in this folder. You can verify, obviously, if you have the right permission. This is certainly a document that needs to be protected. This is a patient's personal health information. Again, this is the power of trainable classifiers. And the nice thing about trainable classifiers are, if we go over to the classifier section and then trainable classifiers, we have over, in the English language, there's over 70 that you can leverage. And these are already pre-built, ready for you to use. But if one of them doesn't satisfy your needs, for example, maybe you want to build your own model based on specific content that exists in your environment. I can think of one example for state and local government customers. If you need to comply with sieges, well, if you can train a classifier to look for sieges type data. You simply walk through the wizard, pretty easy to set up. I'm just going to name this sieges data. Go next, and you can start feeding the model with sample content of the types of documents or files that you're looking for. And then you can go through the training process yourself. Again, really building your own model. Right. Now, once you've identified your sensitive information, the next obvious step is to protect it. Protect it so that when you move to things like Microsoft 365 Copilot, only the users that have access to that information at a file level, now that you've already protected things at a container level, you also want to have that other level of protection at the file level. You can implement sensitivity labels, and that's done in the information protection solution. Under labels, this is where you're going to create your classification labels for your different categories of data. Now, I've already created my taxonomy here These are the type of labels that can be applied to emails or documents. And they can also be configured with permission settings so that only authorized users can access the files that have been applied or the emails that a sensitivity label has been applied. I'm just going to walk through the process real quick so you can see. I'm going to call this one confidential. Confidential 2. I'm going to copy this. We can give it a description. This is for HIPAA information as an example. I'll go next. And here again, this is where you can define the scope of where this label can be applied. It can be applied to emails. It can be applied to files, even Outlook calendar invites and Teams invites. But remember, I showed you in SharePoint and SharePoint Admin Center, sensitivity labels can be applied to containers here, and that configuration happens here. So this setting here is where we can apply or remove permissions. Let's see what that looks like. So we can scope this so that only users in certain departments, users and groups, once this label is applied to a document or email, only users in that department or group are going to be able to access this file. Again, this is limiting permissions as you're progressing on your data security journey. All right, I'm going to cancel there. So that's one way to do it. And sensitivity labels can be applied either manually by users or automatically to data at risk. So if you want to maximize your data protection strategy, you're going to want to leverage automatic labeling. And essentially what you can do is you can create labeling policies and scope them to locations like OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, and it's going to automatically label content that has been identified for things like social security numbers. Or maybe you want to leverage some of those trainable classifiers for tax information, or if you create your own custom trainable classifier, you can use those in these labeling policies to identify that content and then automatically protect it. Now, one of the beauties of this feature is it actually allows you to do a simulation before those sensitivity labels with protections are applied to the content. So it allows you to match to determine if what's been detected is a match or not. And let's just see what that looks like real quick. Okay, this might take a moment. Now, I'm not going to wait on this, but this is where the simulation is run. It's found 27 items that match for what I'm looking for. I'm looking for bank account numbers, and I can review these. Once I click on items to review, it's going to populate here and give me, the admin, the opportunity to click yes or no, whether or not it's a match. And then once I'm ready, I can turn on this policy. So these are the files that have been identified. Now that we're protecting content with sensitivity labels with their encryption settings, another layer of protection is data loss prevention. So if we go to the data loss prevention solution in Microsoft Purview, and we go to policies, you can create policies to protect different types of content. I'm going to go through the wizard real quick so you can see how easy it is to get started. Say, for example, I'm going to say again, you're a health organization. Well, you can use one of these out-of-the-box templates. You can use one of these categories and templates. For example, HIPAA. Now, HIPAA is going to protect content that's related to healthcare, PI identifiers, and a number of things. And then the nice thing about this template is it's a combination of trainable classifiers and the sensitive information types that we mentioned earlier. So it's going to automatically put these in a DLP rule and then allow that content to be protected in a way that's customized by an admin. I'll click next, next again, and again, we see here the locations that we can apply the policy to. They can be applied to Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, even Teams chat messages. This is many times I find organizations, they're not protecting Teams chats. Well, content can be leaked through Teams in a chat message, just like it can leave in an email. This is a critical location, especially with all the remote work going on. Another option is devices, even on-premise repositories. So if you have on-premise file shares, you can use a policy in data loss prevention to protect those file shares that may have content that's sensitive to your organization. I'm going to choose the SharePoint location, and I'm going to scope it to all sites, and I want you to see what the rule looks like. So I'm going to go next, and I'm going to edit it. And here are the conditions within the rule. If any of these type of classifiers are detected, so security number is one of them, some of these ICD 9 and 10 identifiers with some PII, and also these trainable classifiers. And I can decide whether I want this to be content is shared outside my organization or inside my organization. I get to choose. So if users are searching for things that have these items in and they don't have access to, or they try to share it externally, it's automatically going to be blocked if I determine that that's the action in this rule. So you have a few options. You can block everyone, or you can only block people outside your organization. And here's another useful option. Block only people who are given access to the content through the anyone link that's in SharePoint when somebody shares something in SharePoint. So again, these are some of the tools you can use to protect content as you're preparing and as you're starting your data security journey. But there's one other solution that we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, and it's top of mind for many organizations, and that's insider risk, internal threats. And the beauty of the insider risk management solution, as Richard showed on that last slide, if you remember the triangle, insider risk management, it uses Microsoft information protection. It uses signals from data loss prevention and other solutions. And it puts those signals together with AI, with machine learning, and it puts a storyline so that SOC analysts, investigators, legal, HR, they can collaborate in this tool, run their investigation, and determine if this is indeed an internal risk, or maybe this is negligent behavior. But they can get ahead of it because insider risk management is putting the story together for them. And one of the new features that's extremely powerful, and it's in preview right now, is adaptive protection. And what this feature does is it puts users in dynamic DLP policies based on their risk level. So for example, if a user were to be at an elevated risk, if a user performs 3 items in sequence that are high risk, well, they're going to go into an elevated risk policy that's going to block their activity. It's going to prevent them from exfiltration activities. But for the moderate risk level, for example, if they commit 2 violations, well, it may give them the opportunity to be blocked, but give them the opportunity to override the block so that they can continue to be productive. And it's monitoring activity in a dynamic way. And for minor, well, if a user does one thing that's maybe high risk, they'll get a warning. And as their risk level changes, they'll be placed in the right policy. And this is all determined as well on past activity. This is again showing you that Microsoft Purview already has AI built into it. And you can use these features to protect your organization from not only internal threats, but external threats. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Richard, who's going to show you some resources.
Much appreciated, Leo. All right. Give me a second and let's see what we're looking at here. So these are the resource slides, and these have been included here. We're going to share these with you at the end of this presentation. But I do want to call out, this is Microsoft Ignite. This is something I mentioned earlier in the presentation. We're going to be making more announcements about AI at Ignite. Keynotes are going to be coming from Satya Nadella, Charlie Bell, Scott Muth. We're going to be having a lot of people speak on it. There's going to be multiple sessions there with experts, and you can attend it both in person and virtually. The recordings will be made available. And then if you want to further educate yourself and learn more about Copilot as it's coming up, learn more about how these trainable classifiers work, or how the machine learning assets can be used in Purview, we're going to include a resources slide just like this, where you can get a lot of further information, learn about what's coming up, learn about how we're using it, and learn about things you can use it for in your environment. And with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has attended. Thank you for letting us speak on this subject. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm very passionate about it, and I appreciate the chance to get to talk to people about it. But with that, I don't want to bore you to death, so I am going to turn this back over to our MC, Adam.
Hello, hello. So just to echo what Richard said, thank you again so much for being here. Thank you for your feedback. We have posted the links that Richard just shared in the Q&A window, so you should be able to see those pinned so you can access those links. I also want to acknowledge there were some technical difficulties for folks on GCC tenants, which we are going to address to figure out how to accommodate for future sessions. But of course, thank you so much as always for being here and for being part of our Microsoft Purview community for state and local government. And with that, we hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your days, and thank you to our wonderful presenters for being here and walking us through those things. So thank you all again so much. We look forward to speaking with you soon.